Elise, some of Trump's more controversial cabinet picks have tried to walk back some of their more controversial positions. Hegseth's an example. He previously opposed women serving in combat roles, said that very publicly. Well, now he's saying he supports it. Tulsi Gabbard flip-flopping on FISA, key intel gathering tool. RFK Jr. describing himself as pro-choice on abortion, but now saying, at least to Republicans, that he'll implement Trump's anti-abortion policies. How do senators know what these nominees actually believe and what they should trust?
That's what they're going to have to suss out at these hearings this week and judge the authenticity and how they answer. And if you look at those issues where these nominees have shifted their positions, with the exception of RFK saying that he's pro-vaccine, they really are flipping on key issues that these committees are going to care about.
Is that typical?
You see walkback of statements, but in the case of Pete Hegseth, he has so much literature and so much airtime with really just out there views anti-women in the military. And so that is something that he really is going to have to overcompensate for and convince the senators that he actually is okay with serving as defense secretary for all men and women who serve under him. Women actually were the only reason that the Army made the recruiting shortfall last year. They finally made their goal because more women are enlisting. So Pete Hegseth has to show that he's going to be supportive.
And we know Senator Joni Ernst is one to watch related to that part of his confirmation process. Brendan, for weeks, the question has been whether Hegseth can get the vote. Senate Majority Whip John Barrasso dodged the question this week. Watch.
Senator, you are the whip. You count the votes. Does Pete Hegseth, the pick to run the Pentagon, have them?
Well, he certainly has the qualities that we need to lead the Pentagon. He knows about a fit fighting force. He is very qualified, in my opinion. He has a distinguished record of service in the military. Every senator gets to speak for themselves, and they will do that. The meetings have gone very well. Things are heading in the right direction.
Brendan, what's your read, and how much do you think it comes down to what happens during the confirmation hearing? Because obviously there's a lot out there that's been dug up through reporting leading up to this moment.
Yeah, I would say hearings don't often matter a ton, but this one very well may. As we've talked about, there are a lot of issues that Pete Hegseth is going to have to answer for, but there is one key senator on that panel who he has not yet won over, and that's Joni Ernst of Iowa, a veteran herself, a survivor of sexual assault herself. And so she's had some real questions about him. And we saw early on in this process, she wasn't ready to get on board with him. She basically said at some point, I'm happy to allow this process to continue. And now we are at the key moment. If he does not perform well in this hearing and she somehow can't get there, then I would think that would spell a lot of trouble for him. I do want to say it is a very good sign for him he has made it this far. It felt a month ago like he was 24 hours away from dropping out. And the fact that he's weathered that storm, I think, should tell you that he's in a decent spot. But he has a lot to answer for. I do think we should also pay attention to the substantive questions he's going to have to answer for in terms of national security and defense policy. A lot of focus, of course, on his personal activity and allegations, which he has denied, of course. But I know these senators are going to also want to know his views on the use of military force and our strategies around the world. And if he's not able to provide sufficient answers there, we shouldn't overlook whether or not some of these people step on it on the substance and not just their personal issues.
Speaking of substance, Donald Trump wouldn't rule out military action to take Greenland and the Panama Canal. Elise, will that come up, do you think, during the Hegseth or the Rubio confirmation hearings?
I do not think that GOP senators would rush to highlight that. Maybe it seems like
Democrats will have a chance to ask questions
too. You know, I really think that I think that Brendan made a key point that his views coming out, his policy views, Hegseth and these other nominees. You have Tulsi Gabbard, and is she going to be seen as supportive of intelligence collection and warrantless surveillance after previously voting against it during her time in Congress? So you have these questions of substance that really are going to matter. And if there is just, say, a terrible, terrible moment, one of those just made for TV moments, deal breaker, it could be a deal breaker.
So, Brendan, how do you think Hegseth should answer a question on a hypothetical about Trump ordering military action against an ally?
Well, the safe space for any nominee is to say that you serve the president of the United States, and that the president makes policy like this. I don't know that that's difficult to dance around. Donald Trump hasn't really clearly laid out what he wants to do in some of these places. I think he would say something to the effect of, the American national security is always going to come first, and that is my priority. But the president of the United States makes policy. So that's certainly not going to sink him. But if some senators want to know his views on how we should be using the Navy to combat China, and he just can't formulate a coherent thought on that, that would be problematic. I don't know that Pete Hegseth is really at risk of that. He's certainly written a lot about national security issues, so maybe he has some. But we've heard, for example, that Tulsi Gabbard has failed to impress people in meetings with her knowledge of some of the space that she's potentially going to be running. If these people who are nominated don't actually know the substance of what they're supposed to be running, that's where I think you could run into real trouble.